I was stepping out of a small neighborhood bank on a quiet Thursday morning when I saw the man I once promised forever to. At first, I did not recognize him. His back was hunched, his steps slow and dragging, as if each one carried the weight of an entire lifetime. He was leaning over a dumpster behind a strip mall, sorting through torn plastic bags with trembling hands. It took several seconds for my mind to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. The man digging through trash, thin to the bone, wrapped in layers of dirty fabric, was my ex-husband, Evan Cole. 20 years had passed since he walked out of our home without warning, leaving only a brief handwritten note and a silence that cut deeper than any argument could have. I stood frozen on the sidewalk. The world around me seemed to blur, leaving only the image of him holding crushed cans and placing them into an old sack. His hair, once thick and dark, was now white and tangled, his beard untrimmed, his face hollow. When my heels clicked against the pavement, he lifted his head by instinct. For a moment, he stared as if looking at a ghost he never expected to see again. Recognition hit him like a jolt. He tried to turn away, ashamed. "Evan," I said, barely hearing my own voice. "You should not see me like this," he murmured. "Forget what you saw. Walk away." But I did not walk away. Something in his eyes told me this moment carried a truth I had never been ready to face. Before I could say anything else, Evan swayed on his feet. His fingers slipped from the edge of the dumpster, and his eyes rolled back, as if his body had finally reached its limit. I rushed forward, just in time to catch him before he hit the ground. His weight felt frighteningly light, as if life itself had been draining out of him for years. "Sir, are you all right?" a passerby called out, but Evan was already unconscious. I knelt on the cold asphalt, holding his head against my lap, the same way I once did decades ago, when he came home sick after long nights at work. The shock of it all made my hands shake, yet I held him steady. "Call an ambulance," I said, my voice cracking. "Please hurry." While we waited, I studied his face closely. The sharp lines I once admired were now carved deeper by exhaustion. His skin was pale and dry, his breathing shallow. This was not the man who left me with a short note in a world full of questions. This was someone who had been fighting a silent battle alone. The paramedics arrived and lifted him onto a stretcher. As they loaded him into the ambulance, one of them turned to me. "Is he family?" I hesitated only a second. "Yes, I will ride with him." Inside the ambulance, the medic checked his pulse and blood pressure. Severe dehydration, malnutrition. He needs immediate care. I sat at his side, gripping the rail as the sirens echoed. I did not know what awaited me at the hospital, but I knew one thing. I was not leaving him again. The hospital lights were harsh and cold, but they were kinder than the life Evan had been surviving. Hours passed before a doctor finally stepped out to speak with me. He explained that Evan was severely dehydrated, anemic, and showing signs of long-term neglect. "He will need to stay overnight," the doctor said. "Someone should remain with him." I stayed. Late that evening, Evan stirred. His eyelids fluttered, and when he finally focused on me, a look of worry spread across his face. "You should not be here, Margaret," he whispered. "This is not your burden." I pulled the chair closer to his bed. "After what I just saw, I am not going anywhere." He turned his head toward the wall, as if trying to hide from the past itself. "You were never supposed to see me like this. I tried to keep you away from it all." "From what, Evan?" I asked quietly. "What is all of this?" He closed his eyes for a long moment. "The day I disappeared," he said softly, "I was supposed to die." The sentence hit me like a blow. "What do you mean?" "Because that was the order," he continued, his voice dry and fragile. "I was told to vanish or be taken out, and either way, you would pay the price if I resisted." I felt my breath catch. "Who threatened you?" He hesitated, fear flickering behind his tired eyes. "Dangerous people. people who needed a fall guy, people who told me they knew your schedule, your habits, even where you parked your car after work. A chill spread through me. Evan swallowed hard. I accepted the blame so they would leave you alone. I let everything collapse because if I fought back, you would have been next. For the first time since he vanished 20 years ago, the cracks in my anger began to show. His disappearance had not been an act of betrayal, it had been an act of desperation. His words kept echoing in my mind as I watched him struggle to breathe. For 2 decades, I had lived with a story I thought I understood. Evan had vanished without explanation, leaving only a short note and a mountain of unanswered questions. In the weeks that followed his disappearance, my life crumbled piece by piece. I remembered every detail with painful clarity. The foreclosure notice taped to our front door, the letters from banks claiming missed payments on accounts I didn't even know existed, friends whispering behind my back, neighbors avoiding my eyes. Some said he had run off with someone else. Others said I must have driven him away. No one imagined there was something darker beneath the surface. Evan watched me quietly as I spoke. I did not understand any of it back then. I did not know why everything collapsed. He nodded slowly. Because I signed everything away. I let them take it all. The house, the savings, the business accounts. It had to look like I had failed, not that I was being framed. My hands tightened in my lap. You let me believe you abandoned me. You let me believe you ruined us. I had to, he said, tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. If you believed the truth, you would have tried to find me. And if you had looked for me, they would have used you to force me to stay silent. I needed you to hate me. It was the only thing that kept you alive. I felt something inside me shift. The anger I had carried for years began to loosen, replaced by a grief so raw it almost hurt to breathe. All this time, I had lived with a story I thought I understood. Evan had vanished without explanation, leaving only a short note and a mountain of unanswered questions. In the weeks that followed his disappearance, my life crumbled piece by piece. I remembered every detail with painful clarity. The foreclosure notice taped to our front door, the letters from banks claiming missed payments on accounts I didn't even know existed, friends whispering behind my back, neighbors avoiding my eyes. Some said he had run off with someone else. Others said I must have driven him away. No one imagined there was something darker beneath the surface. Evan watched me quietly as I spoke. I did not understand any of it back then. I did not know why everything collapsed. He nodded slowly. Because I signed everything away. I let them take it all. The house, the savings, the business accounts. It had to look like I had failed, not that I was being framed. My hands tightened in my lap. You let me believe you abandoned me. You let me believe you ruined us. I had to, he said, tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. If you believed the truth, you would have tried to find me. And if you had looked for me, they would have used you to force me to stay silent. I needed you to hate me. It was the only thing that kept you alive. I felt something inside me shift. The anger I had carried for years began to loosen, replaced by a grief so raw it almost hurt to breathe. All this time, I had lived with a story I thought I understood. Evan had vanished without explanation, leaving only a short note and a mountain of unanswered questions. In the weeks that followed his disappearance, my life crumbled piece by piece. I remembered every detail with painful clarity. The foreclosure notice taped to our front door, the letters from banks claiming missed payments on accounts I didn't even know existed, friends whispering behind my back, neighbors avoiding my eyes. Some said he had run off with someone else. Others said I must have driven him away. No one imagined there was something darker beneath the surface. Evan watched me quietly as I spoke. I did not understand any of it back then. I did not know why everything collapsed. He nodded slowly.
Because I signed everything away. I let them take it all. The house, the savings, the business accounts. It had to look like I had failed, not that I was being framed. My hands tightened in my lap. You let me believe you abandoned me. You let me believe you ruined us. I had to, he said, tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. If you believed the truth, you would have tried to find me. And if you had looked for me, they would have used you to force me to stay silent. I needed you to hate me. It was the only thing that kept you alive. I felt something inside me shift. The anger I had carried for years began to loosen, replaced by a grief so raw it almost hurt to breathe.
All this time, I had mourned a marriage I thought had died from neglect. Instead, it had been buried under fear and sacrifice. Evan turned his head toward me. I did not stop caring, Margaret. I stopped living so you could keep living. For the first time since he left, the truth felt heavier than the lie. The next morning, Evan was more awake, though his body still trembled with every breath. I sat beside him, waiting for him to speak. He kept glancing toward the door, as if expecting someone unwelcome to appear at any moment. Finally, after a long silence, he said, "There is something I never told anyone, not even the people who threatened me." I leaned in. "What is it?" Before I disappeared, I hid a box, a metal box. I buried it under the old workshop where I used to do extra jobs on weekends. No one else knows about it. Not them, not the company, not the investigators. "What is in it?" I asked. "Evidence," he whispered. "Everything they forced me to sign. The original contracts, payment trails, photos, a list of the shell companies they used, and something else. Records they forged in your name to make it look like you were tied to me financially when the fall happened." My stomach turned. "They used my name? They wanted leverage," he said. "If I refused to play along, they would have dragged you into it. That box was the only safeguard I had. If they killed me, someone could still expose the truth." I stared at him, stunned by the weight of what he carried alone. "Why did you never use it?" "Because if I did, you would have been the first to pay. They would have called you an accomplice. They would have destroyed what little life you had left." The room seemed to shrink around us. 20 years of ruin suddenly aligned into a horrifying pattern. Evan reached for my hand with a fragile grip. "If you ever want real answers, the box is where they begin." And in that moment, I knew retrieving it would change everything. 2 days later, when Evan was stable enough to rest without interruption, I made a decision. I could no longer sit at his bedside wondering what had happened to us. I needed the truth, and the truth was buried beneath an old workshop on the far edge of town. The building sat behind a row of shuttered stores, its sign faded and peeling. Weeds pushed through the cracks in the pavement. The air smelled of dust and old machine oil. I unlocked the rusted side door and stepped inside, taking in the ghost of a place Evan once loved. His old workbench still stood in the corner, littered with abandoned tools and scraps of metal. I moved slowly, scanning the room the way he told me. "Behind the shelving unit," he had said. I pulled boxes aside, wiped away thick layers of dust, and pressed my hand along the wall. My fingers brushed against a small, uneven patch. "There," I pushed, and a loose panel shifted just enough to reveal a narrow gap in the wall. My pulse hammered as I reached inside and felt the cold edge of metal. The box. It was heavier than I expected, packed tight with secrets that had cost us both more than we ever imagined. I set it on the floor and opened it, using the description Evan had given. Papers, flash drives, photographs, contracts with real signatures, not the falsified ones that had destroyed his life. A ledger containing names that made my breath catch. As I closed the lid, the distant hum of an engine made me freeze. A dark sedan had parked half a block down, its engine idled. Someone was inside. I tucked the box into a plain shopping bag and stepped out the back door, forcing myself not to look rushed. I walked toward the mean street until I reached a small convenience store and slipped inside. Through the window, I watched the sedan creep past, slow and deliberate. They knew someone was digging, but they did not know it was me. When I returned to the hospital, Evan was awake, his eyes searching my face the moment I stepped through the door. "You went," he whispered, fear and relief tangled in his voice. I nodded.
And I found it. He closed his eyes as if thanking a god he no longer knew how to pray to. "Now things will move quickly," he said, "too quickly." That night, while Evan rested, I called someone I had not spoken to in years, Frank Dalton, a retired investigative journalist who had once covered political corruption with a fearlessness few dared to match. He answered on the third ring, his voice rough but alert. "Why are you calling me at this hour, Margaret?" I took a breath. "Because I found something you need to see." We met the next morning in a quiet corner booth of a diner on the outskirts of town. Frank arrived with a worn notebook in hand and eyes that still carried the weight of old battles. When I opened the shopping bag and showed him just 2 documents from the box, the color drained from his face. "This is a career ender," he whispered, "and not just for one person." "I know," I said. "That is why I need help." Frank leaned back, tapping a finger against his notebook. "There is only one person who might have the courage and authority to move on this quietly," he said. "Assistant District Attorney Noah Bennett, young, honest, and not yet tangled in the wrong alliances." That afternoon, the 3 of us met in Noah's small office. Noah read the files silently, his jaw tightening with each page. "If this is real," he finally said, "we are dealing with a network that has operated for decades." "It is real," I replied. "My life was destroyed to hide it." Noah closed the folder gently. "All right then, we need a strategy, and we need copies in multiple places before anyone suspects what we have." We spent hours creating encrypted backups, storing copies in a rural bank safe, another in Frank's locked archives, and one more under Noah's jurisdiction. By the time we finished, the sun had set. The war had begun. Within days, the pressure around us began to shift like the air before a storm. Noah worked quietly but relentlessly, preparing warrants, gathering cross-references, and contacting the few colleagues he trusted. Every move had to be careful, every phone call coded. It was clear now that the people tied to Evan's downfall had power that stretched far beyond a single office building. The first set of raids took place early on a Tuesday morning. Frank called me before sunrise. "Turn on the news," he said. I did. The screen showed police vehicles outside a sleek downtown tower, officers carrying out computers and boxes filled with files. A well-known corporate executive, a man celebrated for philanthropic work, was being escorted into a patrol car with his coat pulled over his face. Evan watched from the hospital bed, his breath shallow but steady. "I never thought I would live to see this," he whispered. But their fall was not clean, not quiet. Within hours of the raids, the pressure around us grew more intense. Unknown cars lingered near the hospital entrance longer than necessary. Nurses whispered about men asking for patient lists. The phone in my small rental house rang twice, with no voice on the other end. Then came the moment that shook me to the core. I was leaving the hospital one afternoon when someone brushed past my shoulder harder than a simple accident. As I stepped forward, a man behind me shoved, forcing me toward the street. A speeding car appeared out of nowhere, its tires screeching as it swerved inches from my legs. Someone grabbed my arm, yanking me back. It was an orderly from the hospital. "Ma'am," he said, breathlessly, "that car did not try to stop." My knees shook, but I managed to nod. I understood now. They were not just trying to scare us, they were trying to erase the problem. That evening, I returned to Evan's room, shaken but determined. He looked at my face and knew instantly they tried something, he said, weakly. I sat beside him, taking his fragile hand. They're desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. His eyes softened with a tired kind of pride. Then, "Keep going, Margaret. Do not let them bury the truth again." I promised him I would not. 2 days later, Noah called asking me to come to the courthouse. His voice was steady, but I could hear the urgency beneath it. "We need your formal testimony," he said. "Without it, some of them may negotiate their way out." The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers. I kept my gaze straight ahead, gripping the folder of documents Frank had helped me organize. Inside, the air felt thick with tension. The defendants sat in rows dressed in expensive suits that suddenly seemed too heavy for their shoulders. Some lowered their eyes when I walked by, others stared at me with resentment. The judge banged his gavel sharply. "Sit down. This woman is the reason we are uncovering what you tried to bury." A ripple of murmurs moved across the courtroom. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of belief settle on my side. Hours later, the hearing ended with several pretrial detentions and immediate revocation of bonds for the most powerful defendants. Their empire was cracking, and the truth finally had a voice. 2 mornings after my testimony, Noah arrived at the hospital with a solemn expression. Evan was awake, but weak, his breath shallow, his skin pale. When Noah stepped into the room, Evan instinctively tried to sit up a little straighter, as if preparing for a verdict he had been waiting for 20 years. "Mr. Cole," he said gently, "I came to deliver something personally." Evan's eyes flickered with fear at first, then hope. "You have been officially exonerated," Noah continued. "The state recognizes you as a victim of criminal extortion and coercion. Your name has been cleared. All charges tied to the old case have been vacated." For a long moment, Evan did not react. His chest rose and fell unevenly, his eyes searching mine as if he needed confirmation that this was real. "It's over," I whispered, reaching for his hand. "They know the truth now." A tear slid down his cheek, tracing the deep lines time and hardship had carved. "I thought I would die with that stain on my name," he said, voice barely above a breath. "You did not," I told him. "We made it." That evening, his condition worsened. Nurses rushed in and out, alarms beeped sharply, and I stood in the hall praying words I had not spoken in years. Hours passed before they allowed me back inside.
Evan lay still, his breath's thin threads slipping through his lips. I sat beside him and took his hand gently. "You can rest now," I murmured. "Everything you carried alone is finally in the light." His eyelids lifted one last time. He looked at me with a softness I had not seen since our early years. "It was worth it," he whispered. "You are safe. That is all I ever wanted." I leaned close, my voice trembling. "I never hated you, Evan. I need you to know that." A small smile formed at the corner of his mouth, and then his hand loosened in mine. Evan Cole was gone. I buried Evan on a quiet afternoon with only a small circle of people present. There were no reporters, no headlines, no cameras hungry for a final angle. Just a simple service, soft earth, and the truth that had come too late to save his life, but not too late to clear his name. I stood beside the grave, feeling both heavier and lighter than I had ever before. He was gone, but the lie that haunted him was gone as well. 2 days later, I was called to the district attorney's office to finalize the remaining paperwork. In a small conference room, Noah and a state representative waited with a stack of documents. "The state has approved financial reparation for the damages caused during the years following your husband's disappearance," the representative said. "There will also be a formal public apology acknowledging the failures in his case." I nodded, though my heart barely moved. "None of this brings him death," I said quietly. "But maybe it will stop others from being crushed the way we were." Noah lowered his gaze with respect. "His sacrifice will not be forgotten." Reporters waited outside the building, but I walked past them without speaking. I refused to let Evan's story become entertainment. That night, I returned to the small rental house I had lived in for years. The rooms felt too quiet, too hollow. I spent hours sitting on the edge of the bed, trying to understand how a life could collapse and rebuild all in 1 month. Eventually, I sold the little house and bought a modest apartment with a window that overlooked a park. I did not want anything grand. I just wanted space to breathe without fear. I placed only a few belongings on the shelves: books, a framed wedding photo, and the knowledge that the man I once believed had abandoned me had, in truth, given everything so I could survive. For the first time in decades, the silence around me felt peaceful. As the weeks passed, I learned how to live again, not the way I once lived, full of assumptions and quiet trust, but with a clearer understanding of how fragile and precious safety can be. Each morning, sunlight streamed through my new apartment window, landing softly across the floor. For the first time in years, I met that light without flinching. For so long, I believed I had been abandoned. I believed Evan had walked out because our marriage had failed, or because I had not been enough. I carried those thoughts like weights on my shoulders, letting them shape the way I saw myself and the world around me. Now I understood the truth. Evan had not left me, he had carried the danger away with him. He had traded his freedom, his name, and eventually his life to keep mine intact. And although the price was cruel, his sacrifice gave me something I had not felt in decades: peace. One afternoon, while organizing the last of my belongings, I found a small note tucked between two documents from the metal box. It was written in Evan's familiar handwriting. "If you read this, it means I could not return. Do not remember me for the fall. Remember me for the love that stayed even when I could not." I pressed the paper to my chest and let myself feel everything: the grief, the gratitude, and the quiet victory. Today, I live simply, lightly, and without fear. The truth set me free, and his love carried me here. If this story touched you, I hope you will like, share, and leave a comment below. Your support helps bring more real stories of resilience and redemption to life. Thank you for listening.